Hello, everyone. Welcome to another Purposeful Conversations with me, Emmy, here in the PAMI Code Facebook group. And I'm so delighted to have our invited speaker for today. She's the founder of Transformation and Relationships. And she's here to talk with us today about how to be the best version of yourself so you can find the relationship you deserve. I think this is a really important thing to talk about because I know that there might be some people who are trying too hard to be people pleasers or trying to change themselves just to attract a relationship into their lives. But really, it's having this conversation, having this discussion about how to be the best version of yourself to attract that kind of relationship. I think it's going to be very important. So without further ado, let's all welcome Shannon Corn. Hi, Shannon.
Hi, thank you for having me.
Well, thank you for joining us today. I'm sure this is going to be such a valuable conversation and really just reminding us the importance of becoming our best self to attract that that relationship that we deserve. But before we get into that, tell us a little bit about yourself. For those who haven't heard about you before, and who, because I'm someone, I found you on Facebook and I've been following you on Facebook, but for those who don't know anything about you, could you tell us a bit about what you do and why do you do this?
Sure. So, I have a master's degree in social work. I'm also a clinical therapist. I've worked in private practice for several years and just recently started transitioning more into the online coaching world. And in my work in private practice, I kept working with the same types of clients where it was predominantly women who had a history of failed relationships. And I kept hearing the same kinds of things like all my exes cheated on me, or I always date emotionally unavailable men. And I really started to recognize that that these women didn't really understand that they were drawing these kinds of people to them with their own behaviors and their own expectations. And that's really the population that I love to work with. I love working with women who have struggled with relationships mostly because they don't really have that strong self-love and that strong self-esteem, and it shows up in the relationship. So there's nothing better than seeing a woman grow from a place of that self-doubt and feeling like they don't deserve to be treated a certain way, to seeing them own their worth and seeing that show up in their relationships.
I love it. I mean, when you work with this, when you work with with your clients, is it a bit of a hard pill to swallow when you have to tell them that you are drawing these kinds of relationships? It's almost like saying, you're attracting these men into your life, and there's something that we need to work on in order to prevent that from happening in the future. So how do you start that conversation without actually pointing the finger at them and telling them it's your fault? How does that sound like, or how does that look like in practice?
Sure. Yeah. And I mean, and that's definitely a fine line that you walk, right? Because it's not my job or my intention to blame anyone that comes to work with me, because it's not like anyone is purposely doing this, right? It's not like, oh, I want to date jerks, and so I'm just
And
going to keep.
abusive men come and
Right,
get me. Yeah.
exactly, exactly. So, a lot of it is just, and it's just recognizing that patterns that oftentimes started in even childhood. So a lot of these women either had really poor relationship role models when they were younger, or they experienced something early on in their life that created this belief that this is what love looks like, that love hurts. And so it's less about saying it's your fault, and it's more about learning, how do we let go of those lessons that aren't serving you so that you can move forward in a healthier, more positive, strong way, and stop having those experiences, because it's not their fault.
Hmm.
So that never, like, that conversation doesn't happen, but it can be very uncomfortable to recognize that if every person you've ever dated treated you poorly, like what are the odds that you just randomly attract, you know what I mean, that just every
Mm.
man you've ever met is a jerk? Like there's something obviously happening, some disconnect.
There's a pattern, and the thing that I really would like to ask you is, because you've been working with clients for many years now, and especially in your clinical practice as well, what are the common patterns that you can see from your clients when they first come to you? What are the early warning signs that they might be attracting abusive men or jerks, or what patterns can you see?
Sure. So there's a few things that kind of seem to show up over and over again. And one thing is an inability to set boundaries. Um, you know, uh, and that can be challenging even for someone who's very strong, because to set a boundary can be very uncomfortable. But almost across the board, the women that I work with have been either unable or don't even know what a healthy boundary looks like, what it feels like. Um, and people don't understand, a boundary is not anything complicated. It's literally just telling other people what you will accept from them, what kind of treatment you'll accept, and what they can expect from you. So there shouldn't be any guilt around setting a boundary, but there often is, especially as women, because we tend to be people pleasers, we tend to be nurturers, and we tend to believe that we have to take care of others. So setting a boundary sometimes feels like we're betraying that, but really we are protecting ourselves from being taken advantage of. So boundaries are a huge issue.
And
um
okay, sorry, Shannon. So
no,
when
go
you
ahead.
when you talk about boundaries, what sort of boundaries do you need to set? And when you talk about your clients who are unable to set those boundaries or unable to recognize what boundaries even mean, what sort of boundaries are being violated in most cases?
Sure. So a few common ones would be like the right to privacy. I work with a lot of women who, they believe that their partner should have access to their phone and should know where they are at all times. They don't recognize that intense jealousy isn't love, that it's a controlling, manipulative pattern. Um, a lot of times it's stuff like even body boundaries. Like if you set a clear boundary that you want space and that person it doesn't respect that, that can be something that can be really problematic down the line. So it's things like that, or um, just expecting to be treated a certain way. Like, a lot of the women that I talk to, they are always the one initiating contact. Their partner never texts them, never calls them, never makes plans, and they think that's okay, that they're the only person that's initiating the contact in the relationship. They don't recognize that, it's not just that he's busy, it's that people make time for the things that are important. And if he's
Yeah,
not making time for you, then you aren't that important.
you're not a priority. You're just
Exactly.
there, and you're
Right.
sort of just chasing, really.
Yes. Yeah. And a lot of people then, a lot of women end up kind of being in this holding pattern where they're not really, like the person's not ending the relationship with them, but they're not being emotionally available to them. So these women are just kind of like in this holding pattern where they don't really know where they stand. They're not getting their emotional needs met, but they're too afraid to be alone
Mm.
to end it themselves.
So that's another pattern that you can see. So they couldn't really set the boundaries, but despite the boundaries being crossed, they're still holding on to that relationship because they are afraid to be alone. Where is this need to be with someone coming from? Like, even if you are with someone who's not really fulfilling your needs, why do women just hold on to these kinds of relationships?
I think it comes from a need for external validation. So and I do a lot of this kind of work, not even with just women, in therapy. When we look outward to feel like we're okay, we're good enough, when we need somebody else to be giving us those messages, we tend to tolerate things that we maybe wouldn't if we believed just on our own that we're okay, that we don't need someone We don't need to be with someone. We don't need someone to give us validation that we're okay on our own. And that can be really challenging. A
Mm.
lot of these women, like, they have absentee father figures, maybe dad walked out on the family. And so there's that kind of underlying trauma and that underlying belief that men leave, and so then that creates a place of fear, where they want to, where, the women want to hold on so tightly.
They don't want to be in that place where they are being left or being abandoned, and they don't want to be alone anymore.
Exactly. Yeah.
I mean, for me, I am a psychologist as well, and certainly these patterns, we can see them. You can trace them from early childhood experiences, and some of the beliefs have been imprinted from an early age, and it carries on into your adult life. And yeah, you've mentioned, yeah, the boundaries, this holding on, this fear of being alone, being abandoned. Is there anything else, any other patterns that you have noticed from your clients when they start, when they come to your door and ask for help?
Yeah, I mean, the fear uh, forces them to tolerate really bad behavior. That's probably the most common pattern, but I also
Mm.
see things like just blatant ignoring of red flags, not being willing to acknowledge early on in a relationship that there are issues, which then get them in trouble because as the relationship progresses, they get, emotionally invested. And then when the relationship goes sideways because these things were kind of coming all along, they're stuck. Like they don't want to
Mm.
leave. They feel like they've put the time in. And I think there's also a common belief that if we're with someone and that person loves us enough, they'll change for us.
Oh no.
And that never works. People do not
Mm.
change unless they want to
They have
change,
that
and it's for,
intention to
yes,
change.
for
Yeah.
themselves, not for anyone else. So I think that also can trip people up, this belief that, like, oh yes, there's some problems, but if we really love each other enough, he'll change or the situation will change. And sometimes love is not enough. That's kind of the harsh reality, like that you can love someone deeply and that's not
But
always
yeah,
enough.
the actions and the action, the interaction, the engagement in the relationship actually does matter. And what I have to say though, Shannon, is that okay, the situation in the relationship doesn't seem healthy at this point, but it's good that your clients are actually reaching out and recognizing that they need help. At what point do they start recognizing that they need help? Because certainly I know that there are some women who get stuck in that clueless position for so long that they tolerate being in that position and not, yeah, because you've said they don't even notice the red flags, they ignore the mistreatment, if you like, and the imbalance in the relationship. So for your clients, at what point do they actually notice that they need help, and what triggers that need to reach out for help?
Sure. So, and it's funny because most women that end up reaching out, it's not, they don't typically reach out because they think like I need to change, but they've hit a point where for a lot of them it's like biological clock, they're coming into their 30s
Ah.
and they're starting to, like, all their friends are getting engaged, married, having kids, and they are, in this place where they're like, like, why can't I find a decent person? So oftentimes it's that external pressure, like that pain, that external pain, like why can everyone else find a decent person and not me, that initially like causes them to start following me or to start, reaching out. And then it's kind of a discovery process because initially a lot of times I don't think they really
Hmm.
recognize that this is
An internal
an internal thing.
transformation that they need to go
Right.
through.
Right, exactly. And so that becomes the process. A lot of women initially start kind of following what I'm doing, what I'm saying, because they are frustrated. They just want off that dating roller coaster, right? Like they're tired of the highs and lows. But then over time they start to start to have maybe a little bit of insight, like,
Mm.
when she talks about boundaries, I
I get
resonate
that.
in that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Or when, so that tends to kind of be the process. So
Yeah,
it
that
takes
certainly
time.
makes sense because yeah, it does take time. And as I've mentioned earlier, it's a hard pill to swallow. It's not something that you will just accept immediately. It's gradual. And as you've said, when they start following you, start listening to your message, little by little they understand that there's an internal transformation that needs to happen. And when that gets prompted, how does that start? I mean, how does the process of internal reflection, if you like, how does that, what does that look like in practice?
To start out, we look at a couple things. So one of the things that we look at is what are your patterns specifically, because we every person I work with has there's variations. So we kind of do a review of, like, let's talk about your last two or three kind of big relationships, and let's find the common threads, and then at the same time let's look at why these common threads happen. Is it a boundary issue? Is it where is that coming from? And then we start to look at, like, core values, and how do we show up with our, like, how do we allow our core values to show up in our relationships, and kind of we talk about how important that is, so that you can actually find not just a nice guy but the right guy, because there's a
Mm.
lot of nice guys out there. That still doesn't mean that they're a great fit for you,
Yeah,
right? If you're
someone who's in line with your core values, and until you actually recognize or understand what yours are,
Mhm.
how would you attract that? How would you know if you don't know yourself, right?
Exactly. And that's a huge part of kind of the discovery process. Is a lot of these women have never really stopped and thought about that,
Mm.
or really gave that, like, dug into that, and to, like, what does that mean? What is really important to me? Where am I honoring those values in my life, and where am I not? And how do I
How do you
change
show
that?
up? Yeah, yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Okay, so you go through that process of reflection, understanding your patterns, initially being aware of the
Mhm.
relationships and what sort of guys you've been with in your life, and then tapping into your core values and understanding what your core values are. So you know what you want, you know what's important to you, and then when you meet someone, you will see if you're a good fit.
Right. And then you can recognize the red flags that this person might not align with your core values, and it becomes a lot easier to set a boundary if it's based in something that you really fundamentally value. If it's not just a random boundary that you've set, if it comes from a place of strong belief in what is important, it becomes easier then to set those boundaries and to maintain them.
Yeah, yeah. So after that process, what happens next?
So then it's starting to practice, because it's dating is a skill for sure, right? And they've had such difficulties in the past. So some of that then is putting that into practice while they still have support, where when they
Mm.
run into where they start to feel like they're backsliding or they're struggling with a boundary, you know, giving them that support while they start practicing and start getting a feel for what is it like to date from a place of owning your own worth, loving yourself, and knowing that you're going to be really, my promise isn't that you're going to find your soulmate, because obviously, like, I can't guarantee that,
You
but my
can't,
promise
no,
to you
no.
is that you're going to be okay either way. Like, you're going to learn to love yourself so much that it's
Regardless of who you're with.
right, that you're going to be okay, you're going to be fine. You don't need somebody to validate you and make you feel worthy.
Right. So what sort of transformations have you seen with your clients so far from the moment they step in and reach out to you? What happens through the process, and and you certainly support them as well through the transformation. So can you share some case studies if you have any of what this looks like in practice?
Sure. I mean, oftentimes, it looks like when I first start working with a person, they are really just kind of beat down at, because they've had so many people treat them poorly, so many relationships be such a disappointment, and they don't really feel lovable when we start. It's very much that kind of like, am I ever going to find someone, like, do I even deserve this kind of, the relationship that talk about. I mean, I've been married 25 years, so I know a thing or two about positive relationships, and oftentimes my clients will say, like, I don't know if I'll ever find that, and they don't know that they deserve it. And so it's really watching someone bloom, because
Mm.
and they come to me because of their relationship problems, but their successes show up across their whole life. Because if they learn how to set boundaries, then they're not only setting them in their private life, they're setting them at work. They're showing up in a different way in their professional life, in their family, with their families, with their friends. Suddenly everything just kind of starts to click for them, and
Yeah.
they just have they just be they're very empowered by the work that we do. Like, suddenly it's not so scary to say no or to put what we want first. So it's really just, it's like a whole life transformation, really.
That's
you know
wonderful. And certainly the relationship aspect is just one aspect. But when you truly understand what matters to you, what's important to you, when you understand your values, what you want in life, then you can set your boundaries. Then you can go for what you want to go for. And that's not just in the relationship aspect. When you gain that clarity, when you gain that understanding of who you are and what you stand for, that will ripple on all other aspects of your life. And that makes sense because our life it's interconnected. The relationship is not just one thing in isolation. You have the work, you have your social life, you have your own personal space. These are all connected, and when you do understand your values and your goals and intentions, it becomes clear to you, and you just go for it. And that's wonderful. So you can see massive transformation in many aspects of their lives.
yes, and it happens fairly quickly when they have somebody to help them walk through the process of figuring out what matters to them, figuring out it's amazing when they experience, like, that first boundary that they set and are able to maintain, and it's like a light just flicks on for them, and
Yeah.
it's,
Oh, yeah,
like a
I can
whole.
do that.
Yeah,
Oh, I
exactly.
haven't done that. Oh, I can set boundaries.
Yes,
Oh,
I
I
can
can
say
say
no.
no.
Uh-huh. Exactly. I don't have to do things that I absolutely don't want to do just because I feel like people won't love me if I don't. So, yeah, I mean, I've seen people decide to, go back to school and change their career because suddenly they feel like they're capable of doing that. Or I've
And
seen
you're right. It,
people.
it feels like they are empowered because now they can take control of their life because they know what they want and they know what they are aiming for, whether it is their work or relationships or whatever it is. When it
Right.
is clear to them, it's they can just go for it and, yeah, set the boundaries and go for what they really want. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah.
That's wonderful, Shannon. Well, if there's anything that you would like to share with our audience, before we end this conversation, what's the one message that you would like to tell them?
I would just say that no matter what your background, no matter what you've experienced early in your life, you are lovable. You do deserve to be treated as someone's priority and with love and respect. And you don't have to tolerate bad behavior.
Wow. You don't have to talk. That's actually quite powerful because I suppose there are people who are just used to being treated badly. I mean, for us in psychology, we do talk about learned helplessness. And when you have been treated in this way for so long, you just learn to accept it, and you don't really do, and you accept it as your reality, you accept it as a given. But when you have that other person, showing you that, no, this is not on,
Right.
then yeah, as you've said, it almost like turns on that light bulb moment, and everything else ripples. And certainly it helps to have a mentor, to have a coach, a therapist, or whatever, because I suppose this could be a learning process as well, because some old habits are hard to break. It does take a little bit of repetition, a little bit of practice, constant reminders when you are slipping back to old patterns. So it takes a bit of time and reinforcement to have these new thinking patterns reinforced in their routines, right?
Exactly. Yeah, I mean, and that's what's, I think, great about the coaching model. Like I said, I do therapy, I also do coaching, and coaching, we really provide kind of constant support. So it's not just you come do your hour once a week. Coaching, there's contact in between sessions so that, as you're putting these skills into practice, if you hit a roadblock, we're much more accessible than like in a traditional therapy model. So it really helps people make progress more quickly because they have more
That
continuous
support.
access. Exactly. So yeah, it's
Wonderful.
great.
Well, Shannon, if people would like to connect with you and perhaps work with you, where can they find you?
Sure. So I'm on Instagram at her relationship coach. That's my handle. I will also provide you with my website. I actually did a 5 red flags you should never ignore. So if you want that, you can log on to my website and you can fill out the form and we'll email it to you. And then you will also get my newsletters. And I'm also on Facebook at Transformations and Relationships.
Wow,
So I
sounds
would
like
love
a
for you to follow.
really helpful freebie. Well, I'll put all the links in the description, so if people would like to connect with you and download that, it's a free PDF. The five, what did you say? Five.
5 red flags that should send you running the other way. You never want to ignore these
Yes,
red flags.
because yeah, as you've said, because some women, they don't even notice.
Yes.
So it's good to actually have those red flags flagged up.
Yes.
All right, so we'll put it up in the description. So if you would like to download that and connect with Shannon, it will be easy for you to do that. So thank you very much, Shannon, and thank you everyone for tuning in. I hope that you found this conversation helpful. And if you've noticed some patterns in your own relationships, and maybe you are longing to have that, to attract that relationship that you deserve, the core message that I'm taking away from this conversation is, yeah, you need to really understand your values. You really need to reconnect with what's important to you, and what truly matters to you. Because if you don't, then if it's not clear to you, then what are you going for? What are you trying to attract in your life? So that's really the very first thing, understand the patterns that you have right now, and then reconnect with yourself and clarify what you really want in this life. So thank you again, Sharon, and thanks everyone for tuning in. We'll catch up again next time for another purposeful conversations with me, Emmy, here in the Family Code Facebook group. Until then, take care everyone, and bye for now. Bye.
Bye bye.